Hi, it's Mark Bernard, and I'm here today to talk to you about the top 3 reasons most ISO 27000 implementations fail. The first top reason is errors in scoping. The second is not engaging employees. And the third is no management system. Errors in scoping. Here's some of the things that I've been seeing as I work on ISO 27000 programs. Sometimes I get called in to lead them. Sometimes I get called in to do the audit on them. I'm seeing things like, for instance, people trying to include the entire organization in the certification and registration process from day one. This is a big mistake because it's not necessary. You have 3 years to improve your ISO 27000 program. It's better to start with a narrow scope and focus on a specific area within the organization and then expand it from there. And I would highly recommend that you do it, start with head office and roll it out from there. Not aligning the strategy with the purpose. This is another top area that creates problems. And not identifying the information required to protect. Now, the first point that I'm making under errors in scoping, including the entire enterprise in scope. As the old saying goes, it's easier to eat an elephant if you do it one bite at a time than trying to swallow the entire elephant. And many people can relate to this. Lots of people have experience at trying to implement a complete program in one foul swoop. It's impossible, and it almost always fails. You want to start with a very narrow scope. I use the bubble diagram, for instance, to help explain this. There are many layers. Starting with the first layer, of course, is the security management system. This is the management system that we're talking about in point number 3. Human resources is the second layer, because you need a management system, and then you need people to work in your organization. You need people to run your security programs, but also people get hired into other areas of the business, depending on what you do. And those people need to be familiar during the induction process with your information security program. So human resources plays a key role. They find the skilled people for those jobs, and they help orient them for the organization and its culture. The third layer in is physical and environmental security. Of course, physical security, restricting people to access only the buildings or the offices that they need to have access to, is an important physical security requirement. As our world becomes more digitized and people work from home more often, physical security moves from the office to the home. And we have mobile worker policies with specific standards that people can apply in their household environment. But for the purpose of the ISO certification and the facilities that you're getting registered or certified, you need to define the physical security for those facilities that are in scope. Information technology, of course, plays a big role. As I was mentioning, most of the information we work with is digitized these days. It's in servers, it's on mobile phones, it's in laptops, tablets, it's on servers, it's in the cloud, it's everywhere. IT plays a big role, and certainly ISO 27000 looks at the integration with IT very closely. And then there's the assets that are in scope. So you want to have a good asset registry, including the software information, technology people, telecom, and facilities that are in scope, and they should be in this bubble diagram listed. As well, there are hosted sites. So cloud environments that are either private or public clouds are integrated within this organization. You want to identify a specific service and an information set, such as client information that's being used, and then you want to do a map and identify what parts of the organization it touches, which departments, and which offices and which facilities and what parts of the infrastructure. And then you want to include those parts in this bubble diagram. Scoping, not aligned with the strategy. Now, I do see this quite a bit because most of the ISO 27000 implementations are the result of customer inquiry or a regulatory requirement asking someone to become ISO 27000 registered and certified. And And that often doesn't include creating a business plan, whether it's a strategic or tactical plan that defines how the program is aligned with the organization. So that's sort of the big picture. But the smaller picture that I just mentioned is the purpose. So is the purpose for compliance with a regulatory requirement? Or is it the purpose to satisfy a customer inquiry? If any of those purposes are true, then you need to make sure that your strategy aligns to that purpose, and it needs to take into account the scope of the project as well. Scoping, point number 3 I made, not identifying the information required that needs to be protected. So again, finding out what information is required that needs to be protected. It could be client information, it could be internal information, it could be information about patents or other valuable assets that needs to be protected. So you need to find out where that data is flowing, what parts of the infrastructure, what databases, who has access to it. You need to do a complete mapping and then apply the risk assessment tool in order to determine what the exposure is, so that you can implement some controls from the ISO 27000 standard that will meet the requirements of the registration or certification. Trying to apply ISO 27001 without doing this step, in other words, again, going back to the elephant scenario, trying to apply it to the entire infrastructure is probably going to fail because it's just too much to do at once. So you need to have a narrow scope and then expand from there. Now I mentioned point number 2, not engaging employees. This is a really fundamental part. Not managing the management's buy-in. I'm going to talk about not empowering management and not engaging employees. Generally, these are all recipes for a very slow implementation or maybe a possible failure of an implementation. Let me explain a little bit further. Not managing management's buy-in. There are a lot of people who have been working at the organization that you're about to implement ISO 27001 for. These people have a lot of experience at working in that organization. The last thing they want to do is have consultants or a designated employee bring a standard into the organization, and this just makes executives really very scared of the potential impact on culture of the organization, which is really fundamentally important to the success of the organization. By having a consultant or an employee take a standard, not knowing what they're doing, and trying to implement it without consulting these fine people who work in your office, who have been managing the staff and dealing with problems for many, many years. So the first step is to create a strategy. It could be a thumbnail strategy on the implementation, and then you schedule meetings, one-on-one meetings with middle management. You talk to everybody who supervises people. You talk to all the managers who have specific roles underneath directors or VPs. You talk to the directors and anyone else that you can get a meeting with who's a manager. And don't take up a lot of their time because they're busy people, but take 15 or 30 minutes, sit down with them, show them your strategy, review it, and ask them the question, what do you think will work in the strategy and what won't? And then also ask them what is their experience in this process. And one thing you definitely want to mention to them before you leave that meeting is you want to reassure them that the implementation of your ISO 27001 is not going to change what they do on a day-to-day basis, because a lot of managers are concerned that any sort of new implementation of a security protocol or framework will change how they do things. So, and I can honestly tell you that it generally never does change what they do. But what it does do is it helps clarify. It actually empowers management to make better decisions because it helps to clarify the boundaries for security within the organization and who's responsible for which parts of the security, because everybody plays a role. So you need to manage that management's buy-in very carefully. And by the way, when you get to your governance committee and you present to them the strategy and the risk assessment and the risk management policy for their approval, one thing that they will probably do is they will go back to their managers and ask them what they think about this program and get their feedback, because they're smart executives. They've been around for a long time, and they know that if their management team doesn't support it, that it's not going to work. So by talking to the middle managers before the VPs or executives get a chance to, and taking their feedback and incorporating that into the strategy that you present to the governance committee, you create a win-win situation. So you meet the requirements of the organization and its culture, and you satisfy by providing assurance to the executive team that you've talked to the right people. So manage that engagement with management. It's very, very important. Not empowering management. As I mentioned before, when you sit down with your one-on-one meeting with the manager, you want to be able to reassure them that nothing is going to change, because nothing will change. What you're there to do is implement a framework, define the controls, make some recommendations on potential improvements, perhaps build a roadmap that fits within the fiscal budget over the next few years, and also clarify the boundaries of decision making within the organization. These are very, very important for managers to hear, and you need to be able to articulate that message to them. Not engaging employees. So my experience, and I've worked in many big organizations such as Morgan Stanley, which is a Fortune 50 company. I worked with IBM and EDS, Advanced Solutions. I worked with many large banks, pharmaceuticals, law firms, many organizations. And I can tell you that it's very, very important to develop a good communication strategy that will help to engage employees. Employees, generally, 99% are all great people. They have jobs, they have careers, they have mortgages and family to take care of. They're not about to do something within the organization that's going to create a problem for them. We often hear about the insider threat. There are a small percentage of employees who we do find poking around within the organization, and we do need to take some precautions to make sure that they're not, indiscretionally taking information away from the organization. But if you provide the right tools and the right information to employees, they will be your best asset when it comes to protecting the organization. Inform them about the security program. Tell them that you're not there to spy on them, because that is a big concern for employees. Reassure them that they also have information in that organization. They have human resources, payroll data. They have benefits data. There's lots of data within the organization that needs to be protected, and they can help do that. And the organization also has information that it requires to be protected, and these people are on the front line of doing that work. The security officer cannot be everywhere all the time. So it's important to have a good, engaging communication strategy to get employees on board and help, improve their awareness of security. So over the next couple of years, your security will get better and better and better. Now, number 3 is an important point, and you might say, well, wait a minute, because if you're an experienced ISO 27000 user, you know there's a management system, but you would be very surprised that probably about 95% of the organizations that I audit in the United States specifically do not have management systems. And when I do my audit and I don't see the management system, it's an automatic failure. If you're an auditor, you know you can miss a few of the Annex A controls, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but you cannot miss one management control. And there's about 148 control points within the management system. It is so important. This usually results because the person who's doing the implementation doesn't understand what a management system is. I've had some people tell me that ISO 27001 doesn't have a management system, and then I inform them, of course, that when ISO adopted 27001 in 2005, 14 years ago, they integrated and harmonized it with the 9000 and the 9001 frameworks, which provide the quality management system that's there today, and it's been there for 14 years. So a lot of people don't understand that there is a management system. It's very important. It's mandatory. A lot of times, Annex A gets implemented before the management system, which is a recipe for disaster, because Annex A lists a bunch of controls, about 113, I think, that need to be used to integrate with various parts of the organization, including information technology, but also other areas such as human resources, physical security or property management, contract management. There's a number of areas that need to be integrated with, and Annex A provides those controls. However, those controls should not be selected unless a risk assessment has been done and identified that there is an exposure to the organization, and then an Annex A control should be implemented. Most of the implementations I've seen, has been a regulatory inquiry or a customer inquiry has come to an executive's attention. The executive has asked the chief technology officer, the chief information officer to talk to their folks and have them implement or adopt ISO 27001 to satisfy the regulatory agency or the customer inquiry. It's just as simple as that. However, they usually hand it down to the subject matter experts in technology, and when they look at the ISO 27000 specification, they recognize the controls, which we're going to look at in a few minutes, in 27001. So they implement Annex A without even giving a second thought to clauses 4 to 10. Not implementing the management system procedures are required. So there's approximately 5 core procedures that need to be up and running in order for the management system to be functioning properly. There's also some residual procedures that I'll mention that should also be considered, at least, but not mandatory. Not understanding the management system. Okay, so I've summarized ISO 27001 into a table I call the 27001 matrix. I've broken it up into 2 sections. So in this section here is the management system. These controls are mandatory. As you can see, there's 148. And they cover things like context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. And these are things that a business analyst may understand, or perhaps someone who's been trained as a lead auditor. But generally speaking, a subject matter expert working in information technology, given this specification, will look at this section and say, I'm not sure what that means. I'm just going to skip over that and go down to the lower things that I think that are important. These are mandatory. 148 control points. Every one is mandatory. You do not have a choice when you adopt ISO 27001. They all have to be functioning properly. Now, sometimes, as I mentioned before, Annex A gets implemented first. There's 113 control points here. And as I mentioned, the scenario before where an executive is asked to implement this framework because of a regulatory requirement or because of a customer inquiry, they often hand it to the CTO or CIO, who hands it down to the IT department and asks them to do the implementation. When they look at the top controls in the management system, they don't recognize any of those control points. When they look at the bottom ones, bingo, they see things like management of information security, organization of information security, human resources security, asset management, access control, cryptography, physical and environmental security, operations security, communication security, system acquisition development and maintenance, supplier relationships, information security, incident management, information security aspects of business continuity and compliance. When they see those control points, they know what they are and they implement them. Unfortunately, that's the wrong approach. The management system should be done first, and then a risk assessment is done once an asset registry is created to determine what the exposure is, and then a decision is made. For example, a lot of businesses don't do e-commerce. Some of them do not have retail operations who adopt 27001. There are control points within this framework for e-commerce. So if you were to adopt and implement Annex A completely, you would implement controls for a part of your business that doesn't exist. And those e-commerce control points need to be risk justified. So when you do your risk assessment, you evaluate whether or not you're using POS systems or any kind of automated payment systems, and you determine whether or not you have controls in place and if you need them or not. Most times you don't. Now the management system, not implementing the management system procedures that are required. That was my third point I wanted to make on this third area where failure occurs within ISO 27000 implementations. And this is a reference model that I created that helps illustrate the management system in all its wonder. The 5 mandatory procedures that you're going to get out of the clauses 4 to 10 are governance, risk management, continual improvement, internal audit, and document and record management. And these are very important. These are mandatory, as I mentioned before. I also suggest that asset management, compliance management, and vulnerability management are considered as part of this reference model. And I'll tell you why. First of all, the risk assessment cannot be done unless you have an asset registry. So although asset management is listed in Annex A, it's something that needs to be done right off the bat in order to do a proper risk assessment of the organization. Compliance management is dealt with through the governance process and the risk management process because we create a legal registry that supports the organization and its legal obligations, whether they're internal facing or external facing. So compliance management is technically it's dealt with as part of just the adoption of ISO 27001. If you do it properly, you have a complete legal registry. It includes federal and state laws. It includes any sort of regulatory requirements. It includes contracts with customers. It includes contracts internal facing, such as licensing agreements with Microsoft or Oracle or who have you. Okay, so compliance is actually done very nicely that way. Now, vulnerability management is sort of a byproduct. So as you do your risk assessment and you identify the vulnerabilities and risks, you're going to also identify risk treatment plans, which feeds directly into the vulnerability management process. So although vulnerability management takes on a couple other different scenarios where you do security testing, which is part of Annex A, and you do regular reviews of the technology that's in your infrastructure, on the servers, on the network, what have you. Vulnerability management is fundamentally a part of what you do when you implement the management system. Now, there are 3 other areas that I also suggest that are important. Continual monitoring, so such as setting up intrusion prevention system or intrusion detection system, feeding data into security information and event management system is really, really, really important because you need ears on the digital ground so that you can determine if there are any sort of anomalies or any activity of hackers happening within your organization in order to be able to respond. And this is insurance basically that you're buying here for your organization so that you can identify a problem and shut it down before it becomes a bigger problem. One of the things we hear a lot about is dwell time. And some of the more recent breaches, we've heard that some of the dwell time has been up to 10 years, which is completely ridiculous because people are not listening to the network, not monitoring it for any sort of activity, which creates a huge multi-million-dollar problem. Lawsuits get created, lots of problems come. Some companies go Chapter 11 because of a breach. So you need continual monitoring, very important. And you also need to go hand in hand with that incident management. So when you do detect something, have trained people, subject matter experts that know your infrastructure on that team and have them ready to go and able to shut down or isolate different parts of the system so until you find out who it is that's hacked your system and close them out. And gather evidence because there will probably be a lawsuit or some sort of legal action after the fact. And then finally, identity and access management. Now, these are things that I mentioned here that I think are good for the security office to do. There's no really decision point to be made. So we're not making any sort of decision over the organization and who gets what. Identity and access management, the hiring manager makes the decisions, and all you do is you record and make sure that identity and access management is set up properly and running properly. So I think it's a good thing to include. It's not mandatory. So again, governance, risk management, continual improvement, internal audit, document record management are mandatory. They have to be implemented as part of the management system, clauses 4 to 10. Not normally done in 95% of the organizations I audit in the U.S. Asset management, compliance management, and vulnerability management are good things to add. They're solid. They fit well with the management system. Works good. As well as continual monitoring, incident management, and identity and access management, I think are also good controls. But the latter 6, not mandatory. If you want a registration and audit, just highly recommended by Mark Bernard. Above all, whoever your cybersecurity leader is, they provide oversight, an arm's length reach to remain objective. They shouldn't be part of the management's decision-making process. What they should be is the chairperson of the governance committee, for instance. They collect information, they monitor the security activity that's going on within the organization, and they report on it to the governance committee. If somebody needs to make a security decision, they can consult with the leader. If it's a CISO or a chief cybersecurity officer, or just a security officer, they should consult with them, get their opinion. But that doesn't mean that cybersecurity leader makes a final decision. It should be a manager who's responsible for the area of the business that makes the final decision. In the governance committee, it's the governance committee that makes final decisions over things that affect the enterprise. But lower down within the organization, there are directors and managers who make decisions about their area of responsibility. And again, the cybersecurity leader can provide guidance and oversight to them, and they can monitor and come back and audit to make sure that things are done properly. And that's the right way to do it. I want to thank you for your time. I'm Mark Bernard. My company is Secure Knowledge Management. I provide education, certification for cybersecurity. I provide materials for people who do it themselves. People who want to hire a consultant. I have a team of experts ready to come to you and help you. And of course, if you want to outsource your internal audit process for security or your security management role, we can also help you with that. My website is securekm.com or securekm.us. Thank you for your time.